In a previous era, this would have been the game of the century, and maybe it's not quite that, but it's still a big one. Georgia at Alabama this week in what is, if not the game of the century, it's at least the game of September. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John, you've been alive, I feel like, for about 37 iterations of the game of the century. And I always kind of chuckled, like it seemed like the game of the century would come around about every 5 or 10 years, which I guess made it more of a game of the decade, but doesn't have the same ring to it as game of the century. Do you remember in any past years where the game of the century, you really feel like kind of lived up to the hype and really was a game of the century?
Yeah, there have been a few of those. I mean, I was 11 years old when LSU and Ole Miss played a game of the century in 1959. It's still one of the greatest plays of all time, where Billy Cannon returned a punt, 89 yards for a touchdown, broke 6 tackles, scored to win the game for LSU 7-3. Both teams are unbeaten, 1-2 in the country. LSU went on to lose the next week to Tennessee. They had a rematch, and Ole Miss won by 3 touchdowns. So the game of the century turned out not to be the game of the century. But pre-game, it was. Another game that really stands out, 1971, Nebraska and Oklahoma. Both teams unbeaten. Thanksgiving Day, Oklahoma with the wishbone, and Nebraska won 35-31. They ended up 1-2 in the country that year. That was a tremendous game. And the best game I've ever covered was that 2005 national championship game played in January of 2006, Texas and Southern Cal, with Southern Cal going for a 3rd straight national championship, and just an incredible game by Vince Young, got Reggie Bush. That's the best game I've ever covered.
And of course, a couple Alabama LSU games were also dubbed the game of the century. Maybe didn't quite live up to it in the way that Texas Southern Cal game did. Although there's been great games in that series, and some of them probably did come close to living up to game of the century hype. But I think in this expanded playoff era, John, I don't know that any game rises to the magnitude of game of the century. I mean, back in the days, well, certainly, in the pre-BCS days, but I think, even in the BCS days, you had to be number 1 or number 2 to play for the national championship. That was it. And if you lost a game during the regular season, even if it was just one game, even if it was to a really good opponent, there was no guarantee you were going to be among the top 2 teams in those computer rankings at the end of the year. So it sort of created a landscape for games of the century to happen in September, October, November, because, the stakes couldn't really be any higher than they were in that era. And now with 12 teams making the playoff, for most SEC schools, including Georgia and Alabama, I think the thought is 10-2 gets you to the playoff. So either side here, Alabama or Georgia, they could lose on Saturday, and their fan base would be crushed. It would be a dark day for the losing side. But then you wake up on Sunday and you think, hey, we can still make the playoff. In fact, can still lose one more game and make the playoff. So how does that, I guess, affect your perception of this matchup? Because for me, I think it's still going to be a really fun game. It's still going to tell us a lot about these two programs and maybe who enjoys the inside track at a national championship, although Texas may have something to say about that too, and Ohio State. But how do you look at this within the new paradigm of college sports?
Yeah, it's got to be a game of the century. Has to be loser loses everything.
Mm-hmm.
Hopes crush, no chance of for tomorrow. You're doomed. Your program's doomed. You just lost everything on the outcome of that game, and there's no do-over. You don't get a mulligan. You're absolutely done. All you can say is, we'll get them next time, or maybe wait till next year. Oh, yeah, but it's a doomsday scenario. So this game, it's nothing like that. It's not a game of the century. I'm not even sure these are the top 2 teams in the SEC, much less the country.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and we'll see. We'll gain a little more information on that a few weeks down the line when Georgia plays in Austin against the Longhorns. But looking at this one a little bit, John, do you feel like this game is more important for Kalen DeBoer in his first SEC game, his first major test as Alabama's coach? I know he had to go on the road to Wisconsin, but did anyone really think he was going to lose that game? I didn't. I know you didn't, and I wasn't really surprised at the way that one went. I mean, this is when it gets real. Like the last 8 months have been a honeymoon, and now here comes Kirby Smart to wreck your marriage, right? But then on the other side of the ledger, there's Georgia, and the last time we saw them, they were, just barely getting by against Kentucky. They looked great in week 1 against Clemson, and then it was a typical performance for Georgia and Lexington. Georgia typically struggles up there, and this year was no different. In fact, this year was struggling to the extreme, particularly on offense. And yet, having said that, Georgia still hasn't allowed a touchdown all season, and they are still on the shortest of short list of teams that I think we consider to be national championship contenders. But I think all that perception changes if in his first game, his first SEC game, Kalen DeBoer defeats Big Bad and mighty Georgia and takes down the man who now sits on college football's throne, Kirby Smart. So who faces, I guess, more importance in this game? Who's the game more important for, Kalen DeBoer or Kirby Smart?
Oh, I think it's Kalen DeBoer because Kirby Smart's significance, importance is solidified by 2 national championships. He's playing with house money now. So what if he loses? He can still look back just a couple of years ago when he was winning 2 national titles in a row. And he played for a third and almost won that except for a last play by Alabama in overtime. So, yeah, Kalen DeBoer. Again, it's not a make or break game because there is tomorrow, but there's still the playoff. However, people can, we were talking about this earlier today, but people can look at Nick Saban's record against Kirby Smart, mentor over student, and the mentor kept winning except for last year's SEC championship game. So I think some Alabama fans will say, well, we don't have Nick Saban anymore. What to do? But I don't feel like there's going to be added pressure really to Kalen DeBoer, unless it's a blowout, and I don't see that happening. I just think if he does win it, though, it really would give him some credibility, instant credibility. Before the end of the first month, last weekend of his first month of the season in Alabama, and he's got instant credibility. He said, yeah, well, maybe Nick Saban should have retired. We needed some new blood. We lost that, so, well, he won that championship game, but we didn't win a national championship last year. We lost the playoffs. So, yeah, I don't think it's make or break for anybody, but I think it also adds to the pressure on DeBoer because it's a home game. It's a Bryant-Denny Stadium game. In Alabama, now Alabama's lost it right there at home to Auburn, so it has lost there. It's not like it's out of the question, but it means more when it's at Bryant-Denny Stadium, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned Saban's success against Kirby Smart. I mean, Kirby, he really did everything except master Saban. He got him in the national championship one time in the same season that Alabama beat Kirby and Georgia and Atlanta in the SEC championship a couple years ago. Then Kirby turned the tables in the national championship. But overall, Saban went 5-1 against Kirby Smart. So that was sort of the one mountain that, except for one time, Kirby Smart couldn't climb, and now he doesn't need to, as Nick Saban's on the College Game Day said, and Kalen DeBoer is the man in front of him. And Kalen DeBoer's first 8 months have gone about as well as they could go. I mean, he nailed the introduction. He showed a lot of humility and grace about being, on this hallowed ground in the shadows of legends with Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, and even mentioned Gene Stallings in his introductory press conference. He really managed I think the reality nicely of Nick Saban sort of hanging around in this golden parachute role on campus. I think Kalen DeBoer walked that tightrope perfectly of embracing Saban to the extent that was necessary to sort of manage the perception of what's going on there. And then also, and more important than either of the first two things I mentioned, I mean, he smashed it on the recruiting trail. That's so important to show that Alabama is not going to lose a step on the trail. And Kalen DeBoer has shown that thus far. He started 3-0, and that's all great. But I mean, the challenge on Saturday will be greater than anything he's faced in his first 8 months. What I'm wondering, John, we mentioned either of these teams could make the playoff with a loss Saturday, but I'm wondering who you think faces a more difficult road to the playoff with a loss Saturday, meaning you could only lose theoretically one more time and make the playoff. When you look at Alabama's schedule, some of the big games after Saturday include at Tennessee, at LSU, at Oklahoma, and then the Iron Bowl. But the way Auburn's playing, I don't really know if that counts. So I'll throw 3 big tests out there, all on the road: LSU, Tennessee, Oklahoma. And then for Georgia, I'll confine it to 3 big tests for them as well. They are at Texas, at Ole Miss, and home against Tennessee. So putting aside the rest of the schedule, those are 3 still landmines kind of on the schedule for either team after Saturday. So which one do you think would face a more difficult path to the playoff with a loss Saturday?
Oh, I definitely think it's Georgia. And if Georgia loses to Alabama and it's still got Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Texas, I mean, it very easily could not make the playoff. I mean, it could lose 2 of those 3 games. That's not far-fetched at all. I'm not sure that if right now Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Texas aren't the 3 best teams in the SEC.
Whoa.
And Georgia plays all 3 of them. So
I think they're 3 of the best 5. I would have Georgia and Alabama in that conversation. So, yeah, and then on the other side of the fence, Alabama, I mean, the 3 I mentioned are all on the road. They also have Missouri at home at Bryant-Denny in late October, although Missouri showing some signs, particularly last, I thought for a moment, John, we were going to have to open with another chance for you to apologize to Vanderbilt if they beat Missouri, but didn't have to go down that road. But still, I mean, Alabama's 3 big ones in addition to Missouri, but the other 3 are all on the road: LSU, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. But I would say LSU and Oklahoma have shown more signs of vulnerability so far, certainly than Texas has, which I think is the deserving #1 team in the nation right now. Ole Miss, I know they haven't played anybody, but they've looked great so far. Tennessee looked really strong at Oklahoma on Saturday. So I agree with you. I think a loss becomes a little more damaging for Georgia in the playoff scheme of things than it would for Alabama because of what awaits on the schedule. We'll get to our picks, in the back end of the podcast, John. But I'm wondering, are you surprised, given that this game is going to be that the game is in Tuscaloosa? Are you surprised to see Georgia as a 1.5 to 2.5 point betting favorite? Did you figure Alabama would be favored with it being a home game and based on what we saw from Georgia at Kentucky, or were you expecting Georgia to be favored by the sports books in this game?
I thought Georgia would be the favorite, so it's about what I thought. The reason being, the last few years, even though Georgia lost in that SEC championship game, it had 2 key players far less than 100% because of injuries. That includes tight end Brock Bowers. Georgia has been so good in this kind of game for a few years now. I mean, it hasn't just won some of these games. It's blown out opponents in this kind of game. And so Georgia's got this great big game reputation. And I think even if you go back to last year, and even though it lost to Alabama, I think if Georgia had gone into that playoff, if it would have qualified for the 14 playoff, most of the money would have been on Georgia winning the national title.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's an image, and I think people bet because of that image. And I think odds makers look at that image, and that helps them set the line. Alabama once had that image. Georgia has it now.
John, if you were sitting down to lunch with Kalen DeBoer this week, and you had to give him a very, very brief synopsis of what SEC football means, what college football means in the South, because this is going to be Kalen DeBoer's first SEC test, you know, and he's had success everywhere he's been. And I think you and I both believe you don't have to be a born and bred Southerner to win in this conference. And yet, even though you don't have to be from here to succeed here, it is different down here. I mean, the motto, you know, gets mocked by the SEC. It just means more, but it is a good motto. It does mean more, or it doesn't just mean more. It means everything. Southerner, you've spent most of your career covering college football in the South with a couple detours to other places, but most of your career covering college football in the South. So what would you say if you had to give Kalen DeBoer like a 60-second preview of being a coach in the SEC as he gets ready for his first SEC test?
Well, I think I would sell him on the emotional investment that fans have in this game. Not so much the money, the emotional investment. People could die because of the outcome of this game. I mean, it's documented. I don't remember the exact year when Alabama and Auburn were playing, and Auburn, it might have been 2013. Auburn wins, and one Alabama fan shot another one because she didn't think that fan was upset enough over the loss. Now, that to me tells the whole story. So there are going to be people, I don't care what you've done so far, there are going to be people that if this game goes the wrong way, they're going to hate you and they're going to want you fired. That will be an immediate reaction. They'll cool off in a couple of days and get past it. But the immediate angst that you'll see from fans is, I think, unlike most areas of college football. I think the Ohio State-Michigan games like that, there's some games like that, but it's not just one game like there in the SEC, it's a number of games, and there's just so much emotion attached to it. So I think people lose all rationality at times. Of course, realistically, you wouldn't want a coach fired because he lost one game, particularly when it's in his first season. But right in the heat of that game, there's going to be so much intensity and so much anger, so much sorrow on the losing end. Well, we got the wrong coach. That's what I would tell Kalen DeBoer. I just want you to know, Kalen, there are going to be people hate you if you lose this game.
Yeah, people that are completely rational, Sunday through Friday, they turn into totally different beings on Saturday. And there's no such thing as Southern hospitality when a rival team walks through that stadium gates. You can forget all about Southern hospitality at that point.
It's Southern hostility. Southern hostility.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes, Southern hospitality becomes Southern hostility about 30 minutes before kickoff, or maybe even when the sun rises on a game day to this magnitude. John, you mentioned emotions running high, and as we change gears here, emotions certainly running high in a good way in Knoxville, Tennessee right now after the Vols really smashed, crushed, demolished, whatever your verb is, Oklahoma on Saturday. I know the final score was just 10 points, 10-point differential, 25-15. But being at the press box, covering that game, I mean, it really, from about, I'd say late in the first quarter on, it felt like Oklahoma had no chance. And I think Josh Heupel knew that. He knew Oklahoma's offense couldn't really move the ball. Now, they got a couple touchdowns late in the fourth quarter. You see that happen sometimes in lopsided games, and their backup quarterback had better success than what Jackson Arnold did. But really, it was a game that Tennessee controlled wire to wire. It was a major coming out party for Tennessee's defense. They won on the backs of their defense, not only in Josh Heupel's Tennessee career, but his entire coaching career, period. Even when you throw in his UCF tenure, he hasn't had to win many games with defense. He's used to scoring 30, 40, 50 plus to win games. But this was certainly a statement by Tennessee's offense. Now, there needs to be an important caveat here that Oklahoma's offense has been pretty bad this season. The offensive line's in tatters. Jackson Arnold looks overwhelmed. He's not playing up to his recruiting hype. He was a turnover waiting to happen on Saturday. But even with that grain of salt inserted there, how impressed were you by Tennessee's performance? And does this elevate Tennessee from playoff contender to national championship contender, or do you still need to see a little bit more before you're starting to think Tennessee is national championship contender?
No, I think it elevates Tennessee. I think it also elevates Josh Heupel. He's always been the offensive guru. Roll up the points, score fast, score a lot. He's done that repeatedly. That's how he's won. You always had the feeling with Tennessee teams under Heupel that, well, doesn't matter how bad the defense is, Tennessee will just outscore you. And it can do that against a lot of mediocre teams. Can't do that against Georgia. This was a completely different game, and I thought he managed it so well, particularly with his starting two offensive tackles injured. He didn't want to risk throwing the ball. Oklahoma's shortcomings offensively aside, it's got some really good defensive players and a really good defensive coach in Brent Venables, and it brought pressure on Tennessee in that second quarter with those two OTs out. And Heupel said right then, he forgot about the stats. He forgot about the quick scores. He just said, what's the best path to victory here? And his best path was with defense. Ironically, it was just a week or so ago when he was talking about how Tennessee wasn't just about offense and mentioned some great Tennessee defensive players like Reggie White back in the day, Al Wilson, the star of Tennessee's national championship, and consensus All-American Eric Berry in the secondary back in 2008 and 09. So I just thought this was kind of like a different version of Josh Heupel, but it showed he's just not an OC anymore. He's a head coach, and he can beat you in a lot of ways. This defensive front of Tennessee's, I can't recall seeing anything like it. I've seen a lot of great defensive fronts in the SEC at every school at some point in time in all my years doing this. I've never seen one so deep. It was bringing in third teamers who were looking dominant, who were looking like high NFL draft picks. I'm checking the roster. Who is that guy? Yeah, I mean, they just kept coming. And put yourself in an offensive lineman's shoes. Offensive line was on its heel to begin with anyway. And every time it takes the field, it goes out and staring across the line of scrimmage at a different player. Who's this guy? Well, you'll see him again in about 8 minutes, 10 minutes. So this is I can't imagine another defensive front being as good as this one. Certainly not as deep. Not right now in college football.
Wow, high praise from you, John. And I think, in terms of the playoff sense of things, Tennessee now is as well positioned to make the playoff of any SEC team because their schedule broke pretty nicely, and they really came into the season with 3 marquee games: at Oklahoma, at home versus Alabama, and at Georgia. And they needed to win at least one of those 3, take care of business elsewhere. Well, now they've beaten Oklahoma. They still have Alabama and Georgia. And Vols fans have set their sights higher than 10-2. And I'm not saying that's wrong based on what we saw from them Saturday. But I think worst case scenario for Tennessee at this point is that they lose to Alabama, they lose to Georgia. They're still 10-2. They're still in the first round of the playoff with a chance to make some noise, particularly if they don't get blown out by either Alabama or Georgia. That would, instill some further confidence that if there was a rematch against those teams in a playoff game, maybe it could go the other way. So I feel like of any SEC team, and Ole Miss would be in this conversation close, but I think Tennessee at this point tops the charts. Like if you were handicapping odds to make the playoff, not talking national championship, but just odds to make the playoff, I'd have Tennessee probably with better odds than any SEC team because of what they've accomplished so far, but also what remains on the schedule, and knowing that other than Alabama or Georgia, I just don't see who in the regular season is going to beat Tennessee on its list of opponents. I mean, I know, some people might try to make a road game in Arkansas out to be a trap team, a trap game, but I just don't see. I think that's looking at Tennessee through the lens of past Josh Heupel teams. I don't think Arkansas has the pass game to exploit Tennessee, and I don't think this Tennessee team is going to be tripped up by someone the likes of Arkansas. So I think they're in great position to make the playoffs. I don't know that I'm quite as high on their national championship prospects as you are, but if they beat Alabama on the third Saturday in October, I think I will probably be right there with you. And what struck me as notable about this game, John, and you were touching on it, is the maturation of Josh Heupel as a coach. And I wrote about this in a column after the game. I thought Heupel earlier in his career had a tendency to get a little bit too obsessed with stats and yards and tempo and points. And I used to say kind of half jokingly, only half Heupel might rather lose a game 51-50 than to win a game 21-20. And I really don't know that he would have been able to win a game like this earlier in his career. Certainly not won a game in this fashion, 25-15. And that's not to say he needs to shutter the tempo or retire the offense. I think that's going to become roaring back. But he sensed quickly in this game that Oklahoma didn't have the horses and didn't have the quarterback on offense to threaten Tennessee's defense. So once he built a lead in the first half, it was almost like we've seen Kirby Smart do at times during his career. I think back to that game where Georgia beat Tennessee a couple years ago in 2022. Georgia established a lead in the first half, and then Kirby pretty well said, the Vols ain't going to score enough to come back and win this game. It was all about ball control, time of possession, and draining the clock. And I thought Heupel really went into that mode in the second half. And I know it caused some Tennessee fans angst because they're not used to it, but I thought it was actually a great coaching decision. There was no way for Oklahoma to win that game after Tennessee had established a lead, unless Tennessee made mistakes and served it to him on a silver platter. And Heupel was determined not to let that happen and win with defense.
Yeah, he was determined to play the game the way you're describing it, because of how things went with losing offensive tackles to injury, with how well his defense was playing. And he probably was tempted. There might have been a little temptation there when Nico Yamaleava hits who was it? It was Dante Thornton on a deep post right over the middle. Beautifully thrown ball. It was pretty of a pass as I've seen all season. Thornton catches it in stride out, runs everybody. That's the Tennessee football you're accustomed to seeing under Heupel. That's the Tennessee football you saw 2 years ago in the 52-49 win over Alabama with Jalen Hyatt running into the end zone every time you looked up. But he didn't yield to that temptation. He just remained true to his plan and won the game. He won it with defense. So when you look at these games now that Tennessee has left against Georgia and Alabama, it's not just that Tennessee hasn't been able to beat Georgia lately. What is it, like 7 losses in a row? The games weren't even close. Mm-hmm. That 27-13 game you're talking about, I think, was 27-0 is how it started out, and it was a rainy day. I mean, Georgia has dominated the game, and that's why Tennessee's defensive front is so important now. I think it's blowout proof. And you can beat Tennessee, but you're really going to have a hard time blowing it out because that defensive front just ain't going to give you that many opportunities. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to negotiate long drives against this Tennessee team. You need quick scores because to hammer out 4, 5, 7 yards at a time is going to be very challenging. So I looked right now in preseason, I thought, okay, Tennessee, Georgia, that's a Georgia win. You put that in the win column for Georgia. Put that game in Tennessee's loss column. Not anymore. I think it's up for grabs. And either way, no matter who wins, I think it will be a close game. Same with Alabama. So it's, to me, we're only 4 games deep into the season from a Tennessee perspective. And I look at this SEC race, and I just don't see Tennessee fading. I think it's here to stay this season. It's going to be right there at the finish line. When that selection committee's choosing teams, I think they'll be hard pressed not to include Tennessee.
Yeah, it's 3 cheers in Knoxville, and it's 3 jeers on the plains. John, I want to spend a few minutes before we get to our picks on this situation going on at Auburn. It was more offensive misery from the one-time guru, Hugh Freeze, who, I mean, that guru card was stripped away after Auburn lost to Cal. And now, not just was the card's long gone, now almost the memory of the fact that Hugh Freeze was ever a member of Club Guru is starting to fade. 5 turnovers on offense. Hugh Freeze, in fairly typical fashion, blamed basically everyone but himself in the post game, and then got absolutely shredded by one of his former players, very good quarterback during his time at Ole Miss, Bo Wallace, took to Twitter/X, whatever we're calling it now, and just barbecued Hugh Freeze, saying that he always throws his players under the bus. He never takes responsibility, and it's time for Hugh to look in the mirror. And Bo was really on one, and it would have been unhinged had it not been so spot on. John, I thought Bo Wallace was making some good points coming at Hugh Freeze, because, I mean, really this comes back on Hugh. I know it's only year 2, and you do have to cook a little bit with what you inherited, but this isn't the old days where it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years to turn a program. There's that little thing out there called the transfer portal, and it doesn't always turn up magical solutions, but sometimes it can. And Hugh decided he wasn't even going to try. He turned up his nose at getting a transfer quarterback out of the portal. He said it wasn't worth the investment. It wasn't worth what it would have cost, and that he thought he had enough good solutions in the program. Well, so, I mean, Hugh has responsibility for his situation at quarterback right now, because he evaluated his roster. He evaluated what was in the portal, and he thought, I've got better options here at Auburn. No, you didn't, Hugh. You didn't have better options, and you haven't developed them into better options. And I'm just wondering, John, we both thought this was a decent hire for Auburn, and it's still early, but we're midway through year 2 now, and we know how short the honeymoon is in the SEC. And if you add in Hugh Freeze's final season at Ole Miss, it's now been a while since he had a good year in the SEC. He had a losing year in his final year at Ole Miss with the NCAA suits on campus conducting an investigation of his program, while the disintegration of Hugh Freeze 1.0 was underway. Had a losing season last year and now sits at 2-2 with losses to Cal and Arkansas. Are you out on Hugh Freeze? Are you reaching for the panic button, or where are you at on Hugh and his status at Auburn?
Well, like you, I thought it was a good hire. We talked about it. I thought he was a good fit for Auburn, for whatever that means, and he's been a good offensive coach. But neither one of us has ever had any trouble jumping off a bandwagon. So I think we'll know when the time is. I'm not there yet, but I am kind of looking around as the wagon's rolling through. I said, well, if I jump off here, how good a landing would that be? Yeah, I could imagine a couple of FBI types walking out on the field, coming up to Hugh Freeze and just saying, your offensive guru card, please, sir. we need it back. You don't have it anymore. And I thought, you were asking me a few minutes ago about what would I tell Kalen DeBoer about what it means to lose a game like this or to play in a game like this. Well, Bo Wallace epitomized that. He's a former player for Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss, had his greatest moments. I mean, he didn't make it in the pros. He had his greatest moments as a football player, I think, were beating Alabama under Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss. Players, coaches are supposed to be one big family. Well, it was a dysfunctional family Saturday when Bo didn't like what's happening, and he just vented every bit of that venom at Hugh Freeze. That's what happens when you lose games in the SEC. And so now Auburn fans have been through much. go back. Remember, don't forget about Gus Malzahn. He was winning there. He was winning big games. And I understand Auburn wants more than that. So they hire Brian Harsin. Just a debacle. Just could have gone. How could it be any worse than that? Then they come back and hire a Southern guy, a successful guy, a guy that's won in the SEC. And now he's saying things like, if I were a fan, I would get really concerned when my coach says, well, I don't need no stinking transfer portal.
Yeah.
I got all the guys I need right here. Now, that's when you hit the panic button.
Yeah, and then those guys take the field, and you see them score 14 points against Arkansas, and you think, you thought these were the guys that were good enough in your second season? And it's just, I think Hugh Freeze is operating under the mentality, John, that you get 4 years to develop your program and going to go do this the old way of sign and develop. And yeah, I mean, I think he's got a longer leash than what Brian Harsin does, but I don't care what they told you on the day you were hired. You keep losing 24-14 to Arkansas, you're not getting 4 years. Those days are, I don't know if those days, I don't know when those days stopped existing to the extent that ever happened. They've stopped existing. That's not the situation anymore. You don't get 4 years to lay down the groundwork of your culture and get your recruits in there. You need to start doing it year 2, if not year 1. And right now, Hugh Freeze is 8-9 at Auburn. Like I said, I mean, the leash is longer than it was with Brian Harsin. I don't think Hugh Freeze is facing any trouble this year. But if Auburn doesn't turn around this year, and this ends with a losing season, that would be the 4th straight losing season for Auburn. I think you have to go back to like the 40s to find the last time that happened. I mean, that would put Hugh Freeze into Billy Napier territory entering his 3rd season. And we've seen how that's gone for Billy in year 3. The Sharks, they're closing in and they got their knives out. That's the risk Hugh Freeze runs. If he doesn't turn this around this year, is he steps into year 3 ready to pounce just like they were in Gainesville.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a reminder, if Hugh Freeze needs a reminder, get a video of Billy Napier trying to open that water bottle after the Miami loss. I think it was a Miami loss. Look, when you take over a job and everybody's loving on you and they're saying, oh, we got Hugh Freeze. We got rid of that Harsin dude. Gus Malzahn couldn't win enough for us. Harsin was just a big mistake. Now we got a guy. We got our kind of guy. He knows what it takes to win in this conference. He knows what it takes to beat Alabama. And they're going to tell him. The boosters will tell him. The AD will tell him. The president will tell him, hey, coach, we know you got a lot of work to do. We know this is going to take a little time. We're not as talented as we used to be, and there's some work ahead, but we believe in you, and we're going to give you time to get it done. Well, don't believe a word of that.
Right.
You better win right away. And then to say, well, I got the roster I need. I don't really need a quarterback out of transfer portal. After all those fans right there at Auburn the year before watched a New Mexico State quarterback, Diego Pavia, come in and beat Auburn by 21 points, and he transfers to Vanderbilt, you don't think you could use him? Good gosh.
Yeah, and then Hugh, after the game, like I said, I mean, it was typical Hugh. He's putting all the blame on his players. He's talking about how bad his quarterbacks were. It's like, but these were the guys you thought were good enough before the season. And I think at some schools, you could say like, well, Auburn or not Auburn, but at some schools you could say like, well, they couldn't have got into a bidding war for some of the transfers. But unless everything we know about Auburn is wrong, getting donors to pony up some bucks for positive change or what they feel like is going to be positive change, that's not necessarily been the issue for Auburn. There's been some issues there, but when you pass the hat at Auburn, usually some greenbacks fill into the hat. And I think before the season was the time where Hugh Freeze still had Auburn faithful believing in him. And I think if he said, hey, this is the quarterback I need, we need to pass the hat so I can go buy this quarterback, I have to think Auburn would have been competitive in that space. So I don't think that is an excuse that Auburn can use, is that they couldn't have been competitive going after a top portal quarterback. No, I think Hugh just thought it wasn't worth the investment, and that he would roll with what he had and try to sign someone on the recruiting trail and develop that guy when he gets here. But if he really thought these were good enough options to succeed in his second season in this conference, I just question, what he was deploying to get to that thought.
Yeah, suppose after that loss to New Mexico State last year, he'd have told a few prominent boosters, I kind of wonder if maybe that quarterback theirs might could help us out. And I think all of them would have said, well, let me get my checkbook, coach. We'll see what we need to make it out for. Yeah, and one thing I noticed about that game, when you think of the best play callers, the best offensive gurus, card-carrying offensive guru members, you can think of Josh Heupel, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin. Those guys all pop into my head right away.
Yep.
Watch them on the sidelines. I mean, they all just they're totally into their head. I mean, they're thinking about what's my next play. Now, Kiffin will get excited. He'll pump his fist, and so will Sark and Josh Heupel too after a touchdown play. But in the heat of battle, their heads are spinning figuratively because they're trying to think ahead and come up with another play based on what they see. And Hugh Freeze didn't strike me that way at all. Again, please give me back that guru card. It just doesn't fit you anymore because he was just unhinged over there. He's screaming at the officials, all that, Hey, think of a play that might work and not end in a turnover. That was just an eye-opening game, I think, for Auburn fans. That's a game you kind of need to win, and now you go into the Oklahoma game. Another team with offensive problems, home field. You don't want to lose back-to-back.
Well, Hugh's done. He doesn't have his guru card anymore, John, but we've still got our guru cards when it comes to our picks. I'm waiting for reality to set in, and it still hasn't yet. We're still on our picks heater. Last week I went 4-1 in picks. I'm now 16-5 for the season. You went 3-2 last week. You are 12-9 on the season. We both hit our locks of the week yet again. So let the good times roll. And after we've sufficiently shredded Hugh Freeze and Auburn, let's just go ahead and start there. You mentioned Oklahoma, which is licking its wounds as well. It comes to Auburn on Saturday. Odds makers have Oklahoma as a 2.5-point favorite. Despite everything I just said about Auburn and Hugh Freeze, John, I'm taking Auburn because I saw Oklahoma as well, and I saw all the problems that they face. Now, they made 6 turnovers on Saturday going against Auburn, but they might commit 7 of their own. So Auburn at home, I know they just lost at home to Arkansas, but I'm going to say that this is one of those I've been having some success this picks, maybe a little counterintuitive strategy. I think the urge here would to say, Auburn will never win another game as long as Hugh Freeze is on the sideline. No, I'm saying Auburn home team getting 2.5 points. Yes, I will take Auburn in the 2.5 points.
Yeah, I can see your logic there, and I certainly am impressed with that 16-5 start, but you're right, reality's coming. I remember a betting buddy of mine once hit 17 straight games, pro and college combined, to start the season. He ended up even for the year, and he bet a lot of money. So, yeah, it always comes back to you. But, yeah, I just think Oklahoma has a better chance of scoring than Auburn does. And I also think it has a better defense. I think Oklahoma's defense, unless it's just totally flat after losing to Tennessee, it'll just go medieval on Auburn's offense. I mean, it's going to take out its frustration. What it couldn't do against Tennessee, it will do against Auburn. And Oklahoma's really good at forcing turnovers. So we know Auburn is very capable of helping that stat. So yeah, we'll take different routes there.
Okay. How about Arkansas, John? We were all ready in the preseason to have Sam Pittman as the first SEC coach fired. Sam, he's still out there swinging. The Hogs are 3-1, and Bobby Petrino, I think you thought he was going to take Sam Pittman's job. Maybe Bobby Petrino can help save Sam Pittman's job. They got a little something on offense. They don't have much pass game, but they've at least figured out how to run it a little bit. But they are 3.5-point underdogs in their rivalry game against Texas A&M. I've not been real enamored with what I've seen from A&M so far, John. So Arkansas has been up and down. Sam Pittman, if he loses his job, is going to be kicking himself for blowing that lead he had against Oklahoma State. But I think I like what I've seen from Arkansas a little bit more than the Aggies. So getting 3.5 points, it's without much conviction, but I will take the Hogs.
Yeah, I think when I look at Texas A&M, and what I think A&M will do, I'm probably dealing with a mental illness here, because I think A&M will always do better than it does going into a season, going into a game. And no matter how bad it does, by the time the next game is played, I still think, well, I really think the Aggies are better than what they showed last week. It's still a pretty good team, pretty good, deep roster. I think this team is headed something. I mean, it's been going on for years, not games, and I'm still doing the same thing. So to me, that's mental illness, and I'll deal with that in my spare time. But I'll take the Aggies. I look at Arkansas, and when you tell me Arkansas's got a 3-1 record, it just makes me want to laugh.
Well, yeah, I know two of those wins were, one was against UAB and one was against a school you didn't know existed, Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Pine Bluff. I mean, I've been through Pine Bluff. Goodness knows I didn't realize it had a college there. So, yeah, you say 3-1, and I just bust out laughing. 3-1. Is it in the Sun Belt Conference or something? No, Taylor Green, the quarterback for Boise State. Going in the year, I think, well, Bobby Petrino could help him. He's the same quarterback I saw at Boise State. I like watching him play. He's 6'6". He's got those long strides and is really fast, very deceptive as a runner. And I like the transfers from, where is it? Was it, Jaquindon Jackson? Where did he transfer from?
I don't recall.
Was he at Washington? Anyway, he's a good power runner. The offensive line is much improved.
Oh, he was at Utah, John. That's where
he was at Utah. There you go. Yeah. Well, I was in the almost same area code. So I see that, and I also look at Taylor Green's stats. He's 4 touchdown passes, 4 interceptions, 53.7% completion. That's who he was at Boise State.
I mean, he'd be Mr. Auburn if he was playing for the Tigers with those type of numbers. I mean, they'd crown him homecoming king if he could come in there with those type of numbers.
Well, I mean, Auburn is better off if it didn't even throw a pass.
Yeah.
Just wildcat formation, send it to your quarterback, send it to – if you get Taylor Green in the transfer portal, centering the ball 50 times and letting him run, and you'd be ahead of the game of what you have now. But I just don't think that'll cut it against OU's defense. So
Texas A&M, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm sorry, Texas A&M. I don't think it cut against Oklahoma either. I mean, and again, Texas A&M, my opinion of them is obviously totally misguided. As I said,
maybe you can get into some therapy for your how you've been held hostage by the Aggies, really, for the better part of the last decade.
Yeah, my inner Aggie, I didn't even know I had one, is holding me hostage. No, I think this one will require medication. I think it's too severe for just therapy.
Okay, well, I don't think you need much assistance to make this pick. I mean, I don't even know if I have to ask, but Kentucky is at Ole Miss. Today, Ole Miss is a 17.5-point favorite. You've picked Ole Miss as your lock of the week, I believe 3 weeks in a row, and I think you've hit every single time. But now you can't pick them as your lock because we got got to pick the game here. You got to come up with somebody else later for your lock of the week. But do I need to ask who you taking here? Ole Miss 17.5-point favorite or Kentucky in the points?
Yeah, I'm taking Ole Miss, and I know people look at Kentucky and say, "Oh, it held Georgia to 12 points." I mean, they held Georgia to 13 points, lost a 1-point game. Well, Ole Miss has a lot more offense than Georgia does, and Ole Miss also has a good defense. And what's Kentucky's offense going to do against a good defense? It couldn't even put a dent in South Carolina's defense. So, I mean, Ole Miss could win this game 21-3, even if it shut down its offense from the get-go. But I like, and that's my SEC lock of the week. Yeah, Ole Miss.
Okay, I'm taking Ole Miss as well. I don't know that there's anyone in the conference who enjoys covering a spread as much as Lane Kiffin does, and I think after this really cupcake-filled opening to the season that Ole Miss has been enjoying, I got to think maybe you could say, oh well, they're not really ready for this first test. No, I think they're probably exceedingly eager for it to show that hey, there's a real team brewing in Oxford, and I know they haven't got much attention the first several weeks because of based on the opponents that they've played, but yeah, I would expect Ole Miss to come out intent on smashing Kentucky, and I think they have the offense to do it. That leaves us with the game of the week in the SEC, John. Before we log our locks of the week, Georgia 2.5-point favorite at Alabama. I'll let you bat lead off here, and I'll close us out before we get to our locks.
Yeah, I think it'll be a really close game, and those 2.5 points might matter. The fact it's in Bryant-Denny Stadium, and the fact I haven't seen enough playmakers on the offensive side for Georgia. I think Jalen Milroe can make plays, and I absolutely love its freshman wide receiver, Ryan Williams. So I'll go with Alabama at home.
I feel like I'm getting suckered in here, John, by the last images I saw of Georgia fighting to hold off Kentucky. But I'm getting sucked in nonetheless, and I'm taking, like you, Alabama. I think the location of this game is key. Certainly, if it was in Athens, I'd be picking the other way. And I mean, I think Georgia's defense is really good. I mean, for whatever the concern is with Georgia, I don't know that it should involve the defense. They haven't allowed a touchdown all season, and unlike Arkansas, they've not been playing Pine Bluff. They played Clemson, which has looked pretty good on offense since playing Georgia, and I know is one of the weaker SEC teams, but they have played a conference game already, and they still have not allowed a touchdown. So, but I don't know. I just have a hard time picking against Alabama at home. I think Kalen DeBoer. I mean, he's going to have the fan base. They say eating out of the palm of your hand. He'd have the fan base eating from wherever he wanted them to eat if he beats Georgia on Saturday. I mean, Kirby Smart likes to talk about eating off the floor. I mean, Kalen DeBoer could point to a patch of dirt and say, "Hey, go eat off that," and 100,000 Tide fans would say, "Yes, sir, would love to." If Alabama beats Georgia, and go ahead and predict that. So, on to the locks of the week, John. After you have that great image in your mind of Tide fans eating a meal off the dirt, but I'm telling you, they wouldn't care if Kalen DeBoer delivers a victory against Georgia. And you've seen Georgia fans eat dirt, so.
I was just getting ready to say that. You've got a good memory. Yeah, I saw some Georgia fans munching on some turf after it went over Florida and Jacksonville. They busted down the wire fence, ran on the field. One guy was barking, and then he stopped barking, went silent, and just started eating the grass. I had a full meal right there at the stadium. Didn't even have to go to the concession stand. Yeah, I have a theory on picks this year. Take Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Texas and give the points every week. Now, eventually, the odds makers may adjust to that, but right now, I do that every week. So I probably should take Texas because they'll beat the spread, but that's so easy. I wanted to get a little exotic here, and so I'm going with the MAC game. Okay.
Oh, my stars.
Yeah. When was the last time you picked? Weren't you on a MAC team bandwagon last year at one point, maybe?
I was, and I think I finished the season with a losing record, so I put that behind me.
Okay. Well, I'm going with Eastern Michigan. The line I've got is 14.5 against Kent State.
Okay.
I saw Kent State lose to Tennessee 71-0. Tennessee could have scored 120. I have no doubt about that. It shows otherwise. Maybe the worst team I've ever seen, Kent State. Now, I didn't see Arkansas Pine Bluff. I didn't see it. So, but I wouldn't mind seeing. How many people in the country, if you gave these initials, could APBU? How many people in the country can name the school? APBU.
I think it's UAB, John. And
if okay. See, I can't. It's like the Associated Press at Pine Bluff office.
If they were wanting to sponsor the podcast and change the narrative, our hotlines are open. We're always willing to change the narrative. You want to sponsor the pod, go right ahead. But you got your lock of the weekend. I kind of like it, John. I always like picks going against Kent State and Akron. I feel like that's always a strong strategy, in addition to your strategy of always pick Lane Kiffin to cover the spread. I'm going with the strategy of Wisconsin is not going to enjoy its flight from Seattle to New Jersey. I don't know what they're doing on planes these days, John, but I was on a flight home on Sunday, and the approximate temperature on that plane was, I think, 49 degrees. I saw 300-pound grown men just shivering like they were in the frozen tundra on my Southwest flight. So if Wisconsin's got to deal with those harsh conditions even before kickoff, I don't know how they're going to handle Rutgers. So I'm picking Washington to wilt after that cross-country flight. I will take Rutgers to cover the 2.5-point spread in this traditional Big Ten clash. It will be a traditional SEC clash in Tuscaloosa. Big game, not just in terms of the SEC, but also in terms of college football playoff and national championship race. We will be back with you to discuss next week. For now, thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.